Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. I welcome you all to our next session, that is Investors' Perspective on Social Entrepreneurship. The speakers for this session are Ms. Aditi Gupta and Mr. Shashwat Rai, and will be moderated by Dheeraj Bhojwani. Let me quickly introduce all of them and then we can go ahead with the session. Our first speaker is Aditi Gupta, Principal Investments Asha Impact. Aditi leads investments for Asha Impact, an Indian multi-family office, and has over a decade of experience across early stage investing and development finance. Her prior experience includes co-founding Contrarian Capital, an early-stage VC fund focused on technology-led businesses built for the mass markets. Investments led to date include Pratilipi, Program Cap, Minjar, Gramophone, Singzi, Squad, Automoney, and Adda 247. She was recognized as one of India's top 100 women in finance by AIWMI in 2019. Welcome on board, Aditi. Our next speaker for the day is Mr. Shashwat Rai, Director, Avishkar Capital. Shashwat has 12 plus years of experience in technology, corporate banking, and early stage investing across South and Southeast Asia. At Avishkar, he has successfully concluded 9 deals with over $25 million deployment in equity capital across agribusinesses, financial inclusion, and essential services in India, Indonesia, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka. Prior to Avishkar, Shashwat had more than 2 years of IT product development experience with UBS Investment Bank in Hong Kong. I welcome you both to this panel, which will be moderated by our CEO, AIC GUSEC, Dheeraj Bhojwani. Over to you, Dheeraj. Welcome, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, Siddhi. Was a great introduction. As it says that huge personalities take time to get introduced, and so goes with your profile because there are so many regions, there are so many investments, so many startups to speak about, and we are very fortunate to have you both to have a discussion around impact spread investments and what is the investor's perspective as far as the social entrepreneurship is concerned. And I believe both of your firms and both of you as individuals have tremendous experience, a huge experience around this domain. You have interacted and invested into so many of startups. So I think this can be a very productive discussion for the people who are in this summit. There are some questions which I have drafted for you. There are some questions that have been submitted by the audience earlier. But before we proceed with that, Aditi and Shatwat, both, I'd request you if you can give us 5 minutes of your time to introduce about what your firm is doing in the impact investment space and how do you see this space growing in India. We can start with Aditi and then can move to Shashwat.
Sure. Thanks, Dheeraj, for having me here. Thanks, Harsiddhi, for that introduction. Glad to be doing this chat with Shashwat. So, Dheeraj, I lead investments for Asha Impact. We're a multifamily office. What that means is that we help a number of HNIs and philanthropists in this country invest capital in mass market focused startups. So for us, that means backing startups working in the areas of education, healthcare, food and agribusiness, financial inclusion, the whole gamut. The consistent theme running through that is that the product or service should add value to that target segment. We typically invest at the Series A stage, check sizes of $1 to $2 million. Our portfolio today consists of companies like Gramophone, which is an agri-advisory and inputs marketplace business based in Madhya Pradesh, working with small building farmers. Adda 247, which helps close to 20 million aspirants prepare for government job entrances. TrueMeds, which is a generics pharmacy business, which is helping reduce the pharma spend for mass market households in India. So fairly diverse portfolio across the sectors that we cover. The interesting thing which sets our firm apart from a lot of other impact investors is that we also have a non-profit arm called the Asha Trust, which does policy advocacy in the areas that we invest in. The thought process is that we should be able to take learnings from practitioners in the fields that we invest in and help drive more data-driven policy making. So that's the work that a non-profit does. As an individual, I've been doing equity investing for close to 10 years now, have backed businesses across the spectrum of tech-led venture capital stuff to stuff more on the impact side. The consistent theme has been partnering with founders who are passionate about solving hard problems and We're very excited about the direction of the impact investment industry, because over the 10 years, what we've seen is a distinct difference that in the past, impact enterprises or social enterprises were considered companies or, non-profits run by jholawalas. It wasn't seen as entrepreneurship. It was seen much closer to being charity businesses, right, or charitable organizations. That perspective has changed, both from the fund providers end and from the entrepreneurs' lens. Today, the quality of talent that we see in the ecosystem is fantastic. We have founders coming in, looking at businesses, focusing on the impact sort of target segment, but looking at creating, large commercial businesses at scale. On the fund provider side as well, the interesting trend that we see is that there's a big overlap in terms of, impact investors' lens and commercial venture capitalists. So we often have ended up co-investing with folks from the venture capital space as well. I think that's a great development for impact investors, because that provides liquidity to us down the road, and it also helps the founders get access to a very diverse set of network from their boards and on the cap table. So very excited about having been in the industry and continuing down this path for the next decade or so.
Thanks, Aditi. Over to you, Shashwat.
Thanks. Good to see you, Aditi. So there are lots of deals on which Avishkar and Asha have worked together. So
In fact,
that's
one of your common portfolio companies were there in the panel.
yeah. I know
previously.
Sandeep was speaking before this.
Yes.
Yeah. So Avishkar was actually started almost similar to closer to its name. It was almost like an experiment. So it was started by Mr. Vineet Rai back in 2001-2, when even the mainstream venture capital in India was in very formative days, and most of it was directed towards tech investments in Bangalore and NCR. And the idea was that India is so big; it has so many villages, towns. It has income strata, people across different strata. So there will be a lot of mass market models which can have magnanimous amount of impact. It's just that the capital is directed towards very specific niche verticals. And with that idea, Vineet started, backing very small companies and trying to experiment what can work and what cannot work. At that time, the thought process was that if equity is provided to such sectors like agriculture, education, healthcare, etc., will that lead to scale? And that was the first thesis. And over a period of time, an exit was a very distant possibility, because we were investing $50,000, $100,000 variety. So to imagine an exit after putting in $50,000 is a very hard thing to do. So our idea back then was, from 2001 to 7, was, if we do lots of small experiments, can we demonstrate that equity can make a difference in this area? And fortunately, we got some very interesting cohort of entrepreneurs in our first round of investments. And that demonstrated that people were able to absorb the equity and scale up to a level where lots of follow-on investors started showing interest. And when that starts happening, that sets the wheels in motion, because you as fund manager also starts, raising a significant money from the market. So we drew a significant institutional interest in 2007, and that is when we raised our first fund, which was almost a $14-15 million fund. And now, as we speak today, we manage close to $400 million, and we are multi-geography. So last 10 years, last 13-14 years have been like a very, very rapid growth for this organization. We invest in agriculture, essential services, and financial inclusion. In terms of portfolio, we have done close to 70 investments till date in 61 unique companies. We have got close to 27 exits. We have seen two stories of seed to IPO, in which we seeded those ventures and they went on to list on the stock exchange. Two more such companies are in the pipeline as we speak today. So we have gone through multiple cycles of fundraise, fund deployment, exit, then subsequent fundraise. And that is what led us to move to Southeast Asia as well. And that's as you must have observed that I've done some investments in Indonesia, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka. because we realized that these developing markets share lots of different common attributes. And now we are also moving to eastern part of Africa. We have a team based in Kenya. They are also seeing very interesting tech-enabled kind of business models, which can make a huge amount of impact. So over time, this journey has been fantastic, because what started as an experiment and lots of maverick-like investments has transpired into something so institutional that lots of global institutions are taking attention, and impact investment as a class has evolved significantly in front of our eyes. We were among the first ones who had gone to places like Bihar and put some money there in very early stage ventures, 2 crores, 3 crores kind of equity rounds. And today we see there's a lineup of investors in Bihar. You have the likes of Dehat, Argos, so many institutions getting funded, which is very heartwarming for us. In the area of investment, it's never good to be alone for a very long time. It's good to be alone, at least in the starting part, but somebody has to come. So that validation of mainstreaming, which Aditi also highlighted, is happening in a big way today. If you look at sectors like agri-tech, for example, they are one of the hottest sectors. You talk to any mainstream venture capital investor, nobody wants to take their attention away from these sunrise kind of sectors. And the same thing holds true pretty much across the impact spectrum. So that is the exciting part for us, and we are very, very hopeful that this will only go strong, go from strength to strength from where it is today. And this is one of the best time to be an entrepreneur. So at some stage, you never know, Aditi and Shashwat Rai can become an entrepreneur in impact space. It's very tempting when you are sitting on this side. And
If
the best.
both of you guys are going to co-found a company, consider us as an incubator.
Okay. Okay. We may not necessarily turn out to be a brilliant entrepreneur, but we have just seen a lot. I would say.
Thanks for that vote of confidence, Dheeraj.
The whole ecosystem is for you.
Yeah. So I think it's very interesting time. The talent, as Aditi rightly pointed out, right. One of the first challenges that we faced was that people were not able to find talent to go into these places. If you want to build a business out of Lucknow or Patna or those kind of places, people are not ready to go there. But now, as the funding is also going, there is a lot of attention. People are ready to take chances, and good teams are coming together to solve large problems, and that's why this ecosystem is kind of diversifying so much beyond NCR, Bangalore, and Mumbai ecosystem, which it used to be. So I think very exciting times, very the right time to actually attack some of the large problems. Given the advent of technology, also a lot of things which seemed impossible earlier are becoming increasingly possible. So the tools are evolving, the talent is evolving, the funding ecosystem is evolving. So a brilliant time to actually be part of this.
And in fact, we have been observing this, that each passing year, sans the COVID scenario, each passing year, the support, the investment, the mentors, all of the ecosystem that's coming in, it's getting better and better time for entrepreneurs to start and have exposures with their ideas. I thank you both for the great information that you shared with the audience. I can start with the questions now, but before I do that, I request all the audience that are with us on this platform and on our social media channels. If you have any queries to the speakers, you can put it into a chat box. People who are with us on Facebook and YouTube, you can go to the comment box. You can put the questions there. During the session or towards the end of the session, we'll try to address as many queries as we can. So, Aditi and Shashwat, both of you, now we see that, especially in Avishkar's case, you started with smaller checks, but right now you don't do it. Both, and probably the same case with Asha Impact also. I speak on the behalf of the startups that we work with. In the early years, they need smaller checks or probably the smaller ticket size of seed support. And as far as the impact space is concerned, there is difficulty for these entrepreneurs to raise the early seed support that may be in the ranges of 50,000 to 250,000, the ranges of support. But there are very limited players in this segment. Can you help our entrepreneurs understand what should be their strategy in case if they're trying to reach out to that ticket size?
Maybe I can start. So, so Dheeraj, this evolution of check size has been very natural, and I'll tell you why. Because if I talk about a few examples from my portfolio, for example, we have a company called AgroStar, which is one of the ag tech companies, right? There were two brothers who had come in and they wanted to disrupt the agri input space, and they were they were operating at a very small scale at that time. They had chosen 2-3 districts in Gujarat, and they were doing physical deliveries of agri inputs on their own. But when we met them, we realized that their ambition is so big that they had approached us for some 3 crore kind of check size at that time. And we sent them back that you may need 30 crore at the minimum. And we are ready to start with a 15-20 crore kind of check. And the reason for that is that sometimes what we have seen is that, the ambition is very big. The company can really become a market leader very, very quickly. It's just a matter of getting the right ingredients in. And when it comes to ingredients, many of these companies struggle with talent, and the top quality talent requires a certain degree of investment. So over time, what we realize, if you're a tech-enabled company, you need very high quality tech talent, and that requires a significant expenditure. And if you don't do it, the scalability of the model will fall short, or at least you will grow very slowly, and by that time many other people may have come up. So our view has generally been that we don't necessarily pay too much weightage onto what is the initial ask. We understand the merit of the case, and if we think that the solution is very unique, the market gap is very unique, we really want to make sure that the entrepreneur has significant runway, and also the investments are designed in such a way that enables that venture to actually grow very quickly by finding the right set of talent and marketing and so on. And it's not crippled because of funding. So that is the thought process of these increasing kind of ticket sizes, really.
But which I understand, which is natural for you. I have, probably, I would say that which is very right strategy as far as Avishkar goes. But still, in this scenario today, if an entrepreneur wants to raise a smaller ticket size, what can be their strategy? What are the sources that they can go to? I think they may be ready for you in next 1 or 2 or 4 quarters. But before they come to you, before they get ready, what can be their strategy?
Angels are the usual go-to place. I mean, angels are investing in all sectors. They don't have any particular bias to only specific sectors in the tech domain. And nowadays, the angel networks are thriving. I mean, the level of activity is frenetic in almost all the angel networks which are available. And any deal which is able to draw attention of creating something unique, that is finding lots of takers. So I think, and even the check sizes for angels. I mean, one single angel can write $1 million check also if that person is really believes in the concept. So raising a $500,000 with a differentiated kind of a business plan through these networks, I think is very viable today. That's my view.
Good.
Sure.
Aditi?
So, Dheeraj, what I agree with on Shashwat's point is that there is a lot of money in the market at the early stage also that's become available. And there is a lot less information asymmetry. So finding that money, at least to get a conversation going, has become easier because of platforms like AngelList, Let's Venture, a lot of angel networks like Indian Angel Network, Mumbai Angels. A lot of these platforms exist. The more important point, I think, which you're highlighting, which a lot of founders end up missing, is that there is different kinds of capital that they should be tapping for different stages of company. A lot of the times what we see founders do is that right off the bat at the seed stage, they approach funds who typically do series A or B, right? So like Shashwat mentioned that with growing AUM, their average ticket sizes have risen and there is a lot of merit behind that. At Asha Impact, we typically do Series A stuff, so we don't necessarily invest in startups which are pre-revenue, but there are a lot of companies which need external capital even at that stage. So it's very important to understand who are the right set of investors for your stage of company. Otherwise, you will end up wasting a lot of time knocking down doors that are irrelevant for you at that point. So I think organizations like these angel networks or incubators, accelerators have a lot of role to play in educating founders on that aspect.
Right. So that's what we do. As both of you mentioned, we connect our startups to the early stage investment networks, which are predominantly angel networks or individual angel investors looking for these funds. But sometimes we have seen or we have experienced ourselves that the social impact oriented or probably only impact oriented ventures do not gel very well with a specific set of investors. But that's a different point of discussion. We don't want to take it here. Let's continue with our set of questions. If you can help our startups understand, over a period, there has been a lot of discussion around ROI versus social ROI. In our interaction with some of our startups, there has been some confusion around that area. It's a gray area for a lot of startups. Can you help our startups understand how can they measure their own social ROI for their own startups?
A tough one, yeah. ROI versus social ROI. I mean, this debate. So normally, I'll tell you, Dheeraj, is one simple way of looking at it from our perspective, and we like to keep things simple because otherwise, it's a very confusing thing for us.
See,
So,
if there is a set of individuals who can answer this, they will be investors because ROI can only gel with investors. तो अगर आप
absolutely.
लोग जवाब नहीं दे सकते तो कोई नहीं दे सकता.
No, I agree. But what I wanted to say is that, generally speaking, there's a common perception that, uh, there are always trade-offs involved, of either you do more social impact or you do more commercial scale. The moment, if you listen to a business model and you get into that dilemma of whether they will go for a trade-off of higher impact versus higher scale, chances are that startup may not attract VC money. I'll tell you very bluntly because I mean, we are not in the business of trying to fix business models, right? We really want entrepreneur to be the custodian of the business model because it's his or her passion, and they need to continue their journey in the way that they deem fit. We can only advise basis what we have seen. What we establish very clearly, Dheeraj, is that we see that the scale of the company automatically creates impact, and impact should be seen as an outcome of that, and that's pretty much how we perceive impact. That once we identify the market gap, we identify what intervention this company is doing. After that, if this company were to grow, there is a very deep correlation between the scale as well as the impact creation on the ground. And if it's a dilemma kind of a situation, very difficult for it to attract investment, frankly. So that's my view, and that's what I've seen over 9 years of my impact investing journey. That wherever you face that, this entrepreneur may have to decide between the two, because of the business model that entrepreneur has built, it's very hard to attract investment.
But it's a dynamic situation too, right? Probably it's not clear in the very first 6 months or 12 months of the business, but over a period you decide that you want to focus on business more, and then suddenly you shift your gear towards the impact part. Have you seen any cases like this? Before I come to Aditi for the same question, Aditi.
Not really. It hasn't been the case that we have seen that we need a lot of time to understand that. I mean, I understand that pivots keep happening, business model pivots keep happening, but the larger goal of the company is very clear. And there are some guiding principles that an entrepreneur always operates in, because every entrepreneur who is jumping into the market, there is some existing market condition which is already there. So to that extent, he's responding to the market condition that entrepreneur is already facing, right? So we have not necessarily seen too many cases where it 1 year down the line, the guy has to, or the girl, or the entrepreneur has to decide on which path to choose, and that the path chosen will lead to an outcome A versus outcome B. We haven't really faced that, frankly.
Great. Aditi, your inputs on the social ROI versus ROI.
Sure. So let me extend what Shashwat was saying, right? That I agree. We've not seen that kind of tussle because if you're forced to choose between these two segments, it's quite natural that the non-impact segment will be more profitable, right, for the business. So you are inherently going to be driven towards that choice. So this is something we evaluate at the outset when we're deciding whether we want to partner with this business or not. At that point, we have to estimate that if this business goes on to achieve scale, will they deliver impact to the target segment we care about? And that target segment composition may not be 100%, right? You may have all kinds of users. But if that includes in a substantial form and fashion the kind of segment that we also care about, then for us, that's an impact business. And of course, at the back end, there are many kind of, scorecards and sort of ESG compliance lists that we all internally track, also driven by, frameworks that our LPs keep seeing globally. But at the heart of it, the crux of the matter is that it is a choice of what is the product or service you're building and what is who's your target customer. So a founder needs to look at it only from that lens. A lot of businesses we've partnered with, it's just the founder's motivation is to build a large business around a particular product. They didn't necessarily look at it from, I want to deliver social impact. It's we as investors who recognize that if this founder's vision plays out, this will have tremendous social impact. And that's fine. And that is why you have the ability to bring in commercial venture capital as well, right? Because they're not looking for people who are talking about how much social impact the business can generate. They are looking at founders talking about, this is my vision, this is what I want to build, and this is how big I think this can become and how. So I don't think we should get cornered into the piece about how much impact is this and is this impact or not, those kind of narrow definitions.
Great, thanks. Probably moving to the second half of the conversation. Aditi, last year, Asha Impact published a report which mentioned that this question is around SDGs. Asha Impact published a report last year which mentioned that India needs about $0.6 trillion US annually to meet the SDG targets. This was the report published by a firm. How do you think that such mass of capital would come only in the impact space? Or probably how important are SDGs when you consider any proposition for investments or any startup for the investment?
Sure. So Dheeraj, the SDGs, if you look at them, right, they're quite broad in the sense that they cover multiple outcomes. They cover outcomes around education, about equal employment opportunity, healthcare, environment, sustainable cities. So they're very broad in that nature, right? So a lot of businesses can create positive impact towards SDG goals. Why we believe that that number of capital is possible is because of two big trends. One is that we're seeing a lot of the large fund houses set up impact funds or ESG oriented funds, right? So you'll see these announcements come out from the likes of TPG, KKR, Blackstone. So these are the kind of powerhouses which will sort of put substantial capital behind this. The second is the development of alternate finance, right, or what we call blended finance. There are a lot of businesses which can create impact on the SDG front, but are not suited for equity investments. Which is why a lot of organizations, including ours, and Avishkar is also doing work in that, are looking at creating alternate forms of finance like social impact bonds, development bonds, which can create access to soft capital for organizations which may not be ready yet for equity capital, which is subsidized form of finance. You have an outcome funder, risk funder. So different kinds of capital providers can also engage in ESG funding. And the third, I would say, is public markets, right? Public markets are also recognizing ESG. SEBI recently came up with that requirement as well. So we find different forms of capital getting involved, which is why we're optimistic that we can get to those goals.
Great. Shashwat, your thoughts around it?
No, I think Aditi has covered it quite adequately, because it's all about, A, you can create new instruments, B, you can tap into different kind of capital pools, and both seem to be having a significant momentum behind them. So these are, and lots of global players. If you look at it from a lens of any global private equity fund, for example, and they want to foray into impact, then what choices do they have in terms of developing markets impact? India is certainly going to be featured into the top 2 or top 3 geographies that they can focus into. So even if you intuitively think that there is so much movement towards ESG or SDG based investing, and somebody were to select, what are the target geographies that they can really focus on, India will definitely feature in the top 2-3. So there is, so because of that, you are seeing cropping up of lots of different avatars of the mainstream guys opening up impact vehicles, and that's always a signal that the capital pools are recognizing impact as a category, and they really want to direct their capital towards that. So that's always a good sign, and this is the first signal of that happening.
Thanks, Shashwat. Another point would be a lot of startups come to you, they would send you decks, they would probably do the pitches with you. Any important metrics that were very generic to an impact business or an impact startup, which you would like to see when they come to you? And any common metrics that should be there in all the businesses that you want to see?
So maybe I can go. So common metrics. I think what we try to understand, Dheeraj, is that if you call yourself as an impact investment, for example, impact enterprise, right? Can you define the beneficiary? Who is the core beneficiary of this impact model? And what is the status quo versus post facto impact that is getting created by your venture presence or your venture's intervention? So that is the core thing that we chase, that either, and many people don't prefer to call themselves as an impact enterprise, even though they have an impact, social impact on the ground, but they don't necessarily position themselves like that. But if somebody were to position, then they need to be very clear that who is the underserved beneficiary and what is the impact that you are creating on that beneficiary, and how, what from whatever performance you have done till date, how you evidence based hypothesis you can lay out to say that if this model goes from point A to point B, then the chances of so many beneficiaries getting so much additional impact is possible. So that is the motherhood kind of statement that we typically seek if somebody is positioning themselves as that.
Thanks. Aditi?
So broadly agree with what Shashwat said. The only additional piece would be that the status quo piece that he mentioned, right? It's important to dig deeper into that and ask that what is the unique insight you're bringing to the table as a founder, right? Because the problems behind which we're investing today have existed for very many years, right? That is the unfortunate reality of the impact investors business, that our problems are very old. The reason we're optimistic that they will get solved today is because of the use of technology. So what is the unique insight about either how the consumer behavior has changed in recent years, or what innovation in your business model you have through use of technology, because of which this can be solved now, right? That's the kind of narrative we're looking to hear from founders. The second is understanding your customer base well, right? Because a lot of the times, if these founding teams come from a background which is not rooted or personas which are not the same as the target customer or target beneficiary, then making sure that they have spent enough time understanding the problem statement from the customer's perspective and don't have their sort of different view of what the customer needs. And in the impact segment, that is a problem that happens much more than in the consumer tech world, because there quite often we represent the kind of consumers that we also want to serve with those businesses, unlike the impact world. So looking at it from the lens of the customer becomes very important.
Great, thanks. The next question, before I proceed to that, would request audience, in case if you have any questions, feel free to post it in the chat box. The next question that I have for you is, okay, let's wait for the Q&A. I'll come to that. Don't put it on the screen.
Yes.
Okay. So one thing that we would like to discuss with you about, if you can help our audience understand, differentiate between the impact capital and the mainstream venture capital. We understand that there are differences in terms of age of fund. The valuation dilution mechanisms somewhat differ in the impact investment space. You guys are full time into it, doing it day in day out. Can you help us understand and the audience understand how do you differentiate between impact in investment and mainstream venture capital? Aditi, you can start this time.
Sure. So, Dheeraj, I would say that there isn't difference in the metrics of how an investor operates, right, between an impact investor and a sort of tech-led VC. The difference is more in the risk appetite and what are the kind of businesses that we would partner with. The valuation dilution stuff would work very similar, irrespective of the kind of investor you are. What that means is that, for example, we were talking of agri-tech being a sector where we've seen mainstream capital come in the last 24 months, right? But somebody like an Avishkar or us would have been looking at agri-tech investments even 4 years ago. And we will continue to 5 years from now as well, even whether it is in fashion or not for mainstream capital, right? Because it is a core requirement of that customer segment we care about. Similarly, in healthcare as well, that logic holds, right? Healthcare has got tremendous tailwinds because of COVID last year. So we're seeing a lot of capital flow in. But healthcare for the masses is not something that has been solved for effectively so far. So it will remain a consistent focus for us. So I'd say the difference is what are the kind of businesses we are willing to back versus a tech-led VC may look for, more use of technology or other things, but we'd have greater risk appetite if we see a value for our target segment.
Great, Shashwat.
Yeah, absolutely. So what we have done, Dheeraj, in our organization is that we have defined impact by enterprise and impact by fund very differently, so that there is no confusion there. So what we believe is that enterprise is creating jobs, enterprise is reducing CO2 emissions, etc., etc. So that is the direct impact that an enterprise is doing through their business model, and by creating scale, that impact magnifies. We as an impact investor, what we are doing is we are going to difficult geographies. We are looking at underserved sectors. We are creating novel kind of business models in the market which have not existed. The problems, as Aditi highlighted, have existed for ages, yet not many people have attacked those problems. And we are trying to support these novel kind of business models by going to difficult geographies, finding talent, supporting these kind of enterprises, which typically have been left out because the mainstream VCs are focused on some very tech-enabled consumer tech, those kind of plays, and are very concentrated in these 2-3 cities that I mentioned. So it's a role of a tech of an impact VC to catalyze these kind of investments and take them to a place where mainstream VCs can't differentiate between the two. And that is how we look at it, that our role of catalyst will have to continue till a point where certain sectors become so well recognized that every VC looks at it. And our vision is that we really want to make impact the mainstream. So we really want to see every mainstream VC considering these sectors the same as their core sectors. So we don't want that differentiation to exist. Unfortunately, for practical purposes, we have to play the role of catalyst, and that's what we're doing.
Great point, Shashwat. Just from your what you were saying, just a follow-on question to that. The geographies that you discussed, probably the pockets that you discussed, the founders that are working in those geographies, those areas, those industries may not be aware that something like venture capital or impact investor exists. How does your firm make a strategy to reach out to those pockets, to reach out to those individuals and entrepreneurs and become a catalyst for them?
This was a problem in the yesteryears. I would say this was a problem back in 2005 to 2010 when this whole impact investing hadn't gained prominence. You basically need success stories, right? If any entrepreneur is looking at an ag tech enterprise, they will probably be familiar with 3, 4, 5 top 5 ag tech companies, and there's so much media around. These founders speak at different forums, investors speak at different forums. So what we realized is that the direct inbounds that you get have gone crazy because people are aware now. People know that Avishkar and Asha invest in these sectors. So the reaching out part or discovery part is very frictionless in today's day of technology. So it's not a matter of that really, but having said that, if you talk about the education part of what it takes to really attract the investment and convert a deal proposal into an actual deal, that requires obviously a significant amount of handholding, because these sectors are not fully baked in terms of the ecosystems and so on. So that requires multiple interactions, and that's why many of the deals from day zero to deal completion sometimes takes even 6 months. You need lots of sessions with the entrepreneurs. You need lots of field visits, lots of operational pruning and all of that. So then you come on to the final fully baked kind of a deal, and that requires engagement. It's not as simple as a usual a tech investment where you have trends already set in, the talent is already set in, lots of parameters are something which can be compared between different assets. It's not that straightforward. So that's why engagement level post discovery is the harder part here.
Great. One thing which is probably not in the flow of questions that I wanted to ask, but it's an input that I need and a suggestion I need from both of you as an incubator also. Uh, have you tried to work with non-profits in past and try to take them into the mainstream impact entrepreneurship space? Or probably have you tried to motivate any non-profits to start their for-profit verticals or startups? And in case if you have done it, has it been successful for you? Aditi, we can start with you.
Sure. Dheeraj, I would say it depends a lot on that founder, right? We have seen nonprofits make their way into becoming for profits, but it's less investor driven, because anything that is investor driven is bound to fail. It needs to come from the founder. It's their business at the end of the day. So we are investors in a waste management company called Sahas, where Vilma, the founder, she's been very passionate about this space for almost a decade and used to operate this as a non-profit. But then when she saw the opportunity to scale up, she decided to move this into a for-profit avatar and raise capital. But it's easier said than done. We haven't seen as many organizations make that transition, which is often because it's the founder's DNA. They want to run it at a certain scale, and the inherent difference. And I know I'm oversimplifying things, but just to sort of lay it out, an NGO tends to work with a smaller segment of beneficiaries in depth, whereas an impact enterprise will have breadth, but possibly not have as deep an impact as a non-profit working in a localized fashion can, right? So it depends what is the motivation of the founder. So if they have a vision that is commercially viable, scalable, etc., then that transition can happen.
Shashwat?
Yeah, so incidentally, I have one example, but that example has a lot of context around it. So we had a investment called Grameen Kuta, which was actually a NGO, and they were doing microfinance on a not-for-profit basis. We were part of that whole transition process of taking them to a for-profit model, restructuring, and now they're listed. So now they've gone, obviously they are microfinance, so they are social enterprise, but they've gone on to the completely for-profit side of things. But what I would like to add there is that the reason we were able to do so was because we had a dedicated incubation arm which was incubating MFIs, and they had the requisite know-hows of grounds up transformation required to become an MFI from 0 to 1, how to do that 0 to 1 journey for early stage microfinance entrepreneurs. And by having that kind of deep intervention, we were able to participate there, and it required a significant amount of handholding to do so. If you ask me today, do we have the bandwidth to do something like that? It's practically not possible for the amount of effort you will put in to do that. So that example is there, but I would still say it's more of an isolated example than how the norm can be. So yeah, it's a difficult thing to do, really.
The reason to ask you this is that we try to run some programs for non-profits where we try to sensitize them around what are the probably benefits of coming up with a for-profit model too. You're moving from a philanthropic capital to a self-sustainable model. You no longer get dependent on the charity, but this is a mindset challenge. That's why I wanted to ask if you have deal through or probably you have faced these sort of challenges or have gone through some deals which where the non-profits have started their own for-profit arms. But I think there are very limited successful cases as I get from your feedback too. Moving on, just another question around non-profits as well. In some of our experiences with startups that we see, as soon as they start with their product, they come into market, they start validating. They also see that there are opportunities around CSR, there are opportunities around charitable or philanthropic capital. So, parallel to their for-profit startups, they start a non-profit too. And what they claim it as that this becomes a funnel to our business. Do you think that such strategy is the right strategy for any early stage startup? Shashwat, this time we can start with you.
I don't think so, Dheeraj. I'll tell you where there is an exception. In general, having the two rail approach is a challenge because it kind of deviates focus. But in some cases, what we realize, for example, we have a microfinance company in Varanasi called Utkarsh. Now it's become a small finance bank. But right from the formative days, they had created a not-for-profit foundation, and what that foundation really helped to do was the whole financial literacy part of the women borrowers was the owners of that foundation. And what that helped is that because it is a low income state, the level of literacy is low. So that foundation kind of acted, even if it was not for profit, it kind of acted as the trainer for the core beneficiary segment that the mainframe firm was targeting. So that's where it made sense, because now under the same umbrella, if you're trying to do training as well as you're trying to do finance, sometimes it becomes challenging, and it's important to have more passionate individuals sitting under an entity and doing their job in a non-distracted fashion, and that is also helping the core business. So that was a unique situation where it made sense to have a concurrent two-rail approach. But otherwise, I think it'll at early stages, your bandwidth, your resources are so scarce that you need to rationalize everything.
Thanks, Shashwat. Aditi, your thoughts?
Yeah. So I agree that the two entity approach needs to have very strong rationale, right? So the other example of where we've seen this play out is one of our education companies. They have a math and science learning product for the underprivileged segment. They had set up two entities right at the outset because they realized that there are two kind of customers that they're going to be serving. One is the customer who has the ability to pay as a private customer. So for them, we had a private limited under which this business was housed. The other part of their business was the kind of students who government needed to support for their education. And that is a business they could only do if they were structured as a non-profit. So they set up a different entity for that to be able to take their product to that segment who otherwise would have got left behind. But having said that, the continuous challenge you do face in this situation is how do you account for, where is the management's bandwidth being focused more? Which is why if there is two entities being set up, then there needs to be a very clear delineation of team and responsibilities. There should be separate teams looking at the two businesses. There can be overlap in product and services, but there needs to be different leadership involved.
Thanks, Aditi. Thanks, Shashwat. Before I move on to my last question for the evening, would request our team to take any questions which are there on social media or to this platform. Okay. So do you want me to read it? Do you want me to read it through? I think both of you can probably answer to this query, starting with Aditi.
Sure. If we could maybe scroll down to reading the entire question because I can see.
So let me read it for you. Ankit has asked that I want to understand from an investor's perspective for funding. For a research-based startup developing product for tremendous positive impact to the environment, user will be reluctant because it has no monetary benefit by using the product.
Okay, sure.
Difficult to understand the question at my perspective, but Aditi, you can take a shot.
So let me answer it with an example, right? I think this is a very valid question. And what we've seen startups do interestingly really well is that recognizing that the user and payer may be different, meaning that you can have a B2C interface for providing information and use, but the pair is some enterprise. For example, we've been looking at startups in the air quality space. So we want to empower citizens with information on air quality around them, so they can take the right decisions, especially if, let's say, they suffer from chronic diseases. But at the same time, it's hard to monetize this from the customer's end. So we've seen this startup be able to work with different businesses who are willing to pay for the same information. So similarly, when you say of product usage, it can also be, let's say, an air filter, right, where you may need regulation to be the sort of tailwind which causes this usage to happen, which is also happening at an industry-wide level, again, in the air quality space. So contextual to what you're asking, but very often regulation will have a role to play, and try and see if you can find a way to identify some businesses who might be willing to pay for that.
Thanks, Udvi. Shashwat, your thoughts on the previous question first?
Yeah. So actually, I'll tell you, there is a whole gamut of climate funds coming up, and lots of Western capital has actually created lots of structures. So it doesn't necessarily have to have an underlying investee which generates a significant revenue and profitability over a period of time. They are also trying to support technologies which can make almost like a green P&L. For example, if let's say there is a technology which is doing carbon sequestration, then that cannot be assessed on the basis of the P&L that venture can generate, but the climate impact of that venture can be quite significant. So that's why there is a lot of innovation happening within climate-oriented funds, which is trying to identify different structures of identifying the goal-based kind of investment, rather than a standard getting into a venture and exiting that venture kind of investment. And lots of work is happening. Lots of European institutions who are big on climate change are trying to come up with that kind of capital. And you will see more and more funds coming up with these strategies who are ready to support novel technologies which don't necessarily have a P&L angle to it, but still have a very superlative objective in terms of their climate outcomes. And you will see more and more vehicles emerging on that front.
Thanks, Shashwat. Team, if we can take the next question. Okay, there's a question from Altaf, Sheikh Altaf, which is, when will you quit your investment and what are the parameters you consistently check on? Aditi? The exits?
Yeah. Okay.
One of your favorite phases of the startup.
No, sir. The journey of partnering is much more, sort of enjoyable than the actual exit. But yes, we have fiduciary responsibility. We are in the business of returning capital to our investors. And we wouldn't call it quitting a startup, right? Because our mission, like Shashwat was also alluding to earlier, is to be a catalyst. So we typically come in at earlier stages, and if as part of our investment, the enterprise scales to a level where other bigger investors can come and support that journey, then that's a successful outcome for us, for our capital. So I would say that is what we determine as the lens to whether we want to exit a company or not, right? That is the job done. Do we have enough partners who can sustain the business from here on? So whether that happens in 2 years, which is something we've seen play out in one of our earlier education finance companies, Varthana, we got a 90% IRR in a 2-year period. And we believed that with the kind of large private equity investor that was coming in, our job there was done. So we would rather take that capital out and put it behind more early stage companies and create more impact. So really, that's the lens that we look at this with.
Thanks. Shashwat?
Yeah, exits are very contextual, to be honest. Sometimes very strange things happen. Out of nowhere, somebody comes and just wants to buy you. But still, you want to have some strategy. At the time of entering, you believe that this company at scale will be attractive for ABC, a kind of audience, and you work towards that goal. But having said that, I mean, one of the examples which in our case happened very recently. So there was a food solutions company called Kotaram, which was one of the market leaders in millet-based kind of products in the market, and this investment was barely 2.5 years old for us. But Tata Group came and they really wanted to magnify the distribution strength of this venture. But their only condition was they wanted a complete control on that because they wanted the entire brand to run under the Tata brand. And in the interest of the entrepreneur and given how competitive this market is, we also realized that probably with the strength of Tata Group behind it, the distribution girth of this venture will magnify by 100x to what it is today. So it was we had a financial outcome to it, but also strategically, if you think about it, that company's destiny is likely to change significantly with the new buyer. And that is how, sometimes when these opportunities arise, you have to take on the spot calls, and you have to decide on an overall basis, from a financial standpoint, is it making sense? From a responsible exit standpoint, is it making sense? And then you assess and you take decisions and you move on with it. So that is how it typically transpires.
Thanks, Shashwat. Thanks, Aditi. Moving now, as we are getting towards the end of it, just wanted to have a very generic question to you. What are the future sectors that you see coming up in next 1 to 5 years? I believe that you must be getting this question in a lot of forums, but this can also help our early stage entrepreneurs to understand what are the sectors they can expect to be into. Aditi, we can start with you first.
Sure. So, Dheeraj, I'd say that I don't think there are new sectors that are coming about, I'd say, because especially for an impact investor's lens, right? We're looking to solve core problems for our target user base. The innovation is happening in either the technology layer, right? So the use of ML and AI. For example, our agri-business has built an agronomy intelligence engine based on machine learning, which helps them guide farmers on what is the right farming practice for their crop based on current parameters. What is evolving is that all these sectors are becoming deeper, right? So within healthcare, for example, we're seeing startups focus, let's say, on diabetes because of the growing incidence in the country, right? So that vertical is seeing a lot of depth of innovation. Similarly, oncology. So one can go deeper into subsectors like this in agri itself, right? Agri is seeing so much innovation, both in business models and technology. So I'd say from my perspective, it's not new sectors, but new ways of solving these problems and sort of deeper pockets that people have identified.
Thanks. Shashwat?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I mean, the whole, I mean, within sector, the things become more and more nuanced over a period of time, and we've seen that earlier in the very formative days, agri-tech used to have a very different definition. Today, people are using satellite imagery, data analysis. Farmers are using smartphones, uploading their crop data, uploading their input data, and so on. So, that the opportunities within the sectors keep on getting more and more deeper and enhanced. And that is how we look at it, that within these sectors, the way to solve some of the problems are evolving, and many of the problems which earlier looked impossible are becoming possible, because the whole stakeholder behavior, the whole data is evolving over a period of time. And that's why you need to keep your eyes and ears open on mega events. Like, for example, Geo has really been a revolution in our country. The number of smartphones, the amount of data that we are consuming, and the new people who are coming to the fold of digitally connected users. The smart entrepreneurs are able to identify these macro trends, are able to use this premise to build business models which are smarter than their incumbents and create very unique solutions. And that is how we look at it, that some of these macro events will keep on happening, and that has a dovetail effect on the entire ecosystem. And then an entrepreneur comes and creates a unique solution which earlier wasn't either viable, or nobody even thought about the viability of that. So that's that's how we have seen these things evolving over a period of time.
Great points, both of you. Just before I wind up and give an official vote of thanks to you, people want to understand how can they reach out to your firms if there is a possibility to help them understand how can they apply for your support.
So
Shashwat, you can go first.
we have we have links on our website where people can submit their proposals. There is an email ID also specified. There is a form as well. So you can write there, and I am also available on LinkedIn. So whichever way deems fit to you guys. We are very approachable. We respond very quickly as well.
Aditi?
Likewise, Dheeraj, our website has details on how to reach us as a firm. I'm active on LinkedIn, so happy to respond to any requests there. The only request I'd make to people is that, when they're reaching out to firms, they should do a little bit of background work and not do sort of a carpet bombing, because it's a bad use of their time. They will just spend too much time chasing too many people who are not relevant. And the second is, any cold reach outs should be, concise and focused on what they're building and what they're looking for at the moment. Very often we get, very, very long, detailed data, which I don't think our firms have the bandwidth to consume that kind of data in inbound sort of requests. So if you can take the time to drill down the idea and the ask, that will sort of really improve the chances of, getting a positive response back.
Great points, both of you. I, probably personally enjoyed the discussion very much, and I hope our audience had it too. And on behalf of Atal Incubation Center at Gujarat University, AIC GUSEC, and our partners UNICEF UA and ECHI also, would like to thank you for your time, especially. I understand investors' time is more costlier than the entrepreneurs. This is the presumption, but no, there's just a presumption from many people. A lot of entrepreneurs say that, but I value your time and thank you for taking out such valuable time from your calendar for having this discussion. I would like to hand over the session to Harsiddhi once again. Harsiddhi, over to you.
Thank you, Dheeraj. Thank you, Shashwat and Aditi, for being with us and patiently answering Dheeraj's questions, the attendees' questions. Thank you so much. And before we move out, I would like to announce that after this, we have the exhibitions going on with various startups. So I would request all of you to join us there. And once again, I would like to thank all our partners. AIC GUSEC has been very privileged to be partnering with UNICEF, ECHI, and under the aegis of Niti Aayog, Atal Innovation Mission, Gujarat University, and a special mention to our supporters, Yuva, Startup Gujarat and Industries Commissionerate, Government of Gujarat. Also thanking our outreach and ecosystem partners, iHub, Young Indians, GoKarma, Startup Oasis, Global Shapers Community, Ludhiana, CIIE, IIT Hyderabad, iCowork, SSIP, Vadvani Foundation, and FRIA. We'll be reconnecting again with the session at 7:30. Before that, we have 5:30 to 6:30 our exhibitions that will be opening up, and 6:30 to 7 we have break. And then we'll be connecting 6:30 to 7:30 we have break, and then we'll be reconnecting for our last session, which is global perspectives and initiatives for scaling social enterprises. I request you all to join us again at the panel. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Dheeraj.
talking to
Thanks,
you.
Harsiddhi.
Bye.
Take care.
Bye.